Duncan Wood is director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. He joins us to discuss the latest on NAFTA negotiations, the unending NAFTA negotiations. Duncan, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So round two set to begin September 1 in Mexico this time. What do we know about what's coming up on the agenda?
Well, let's begin with what happened in the
Recap
first
of round one here in D.C.
First of all, it was a really dramatic start to the negotiations. You had a big public conference, and the U.S. negotiating team made a point of stressing how NAFTA has failed Americans, and that this was a serious effort to renegotiate, and that the United States believed that this was an issue of utmost importance. Contrast that with the Canadian and the Mexican statements, which said NAFTA has been good for all three of our countries. We're focused on actually building North American competitiveness. And we have some issues that we'd like to modernize in there. The tone was completely different. On the one side, you had the United States, which was adopting a very aggressive negotiating strategy or tactic from the start. On the other side, you had Mexico and Canada, which says, we like things the way they are. We're happy to update it. Apparently, that first round of negotiations was quite trying. There were a number of issues which came up that the three sides were quite distant on. And in particular, the question of rules of origin and how much content, national content versus regional content, can be included. And the United States is very anxious to raise the amount of American content in goods, whereas Mexico and Canada say, no, it should be about regional content because that's the way we remain competitive as a region. Now, the talks ended and everybody recognizes that it was incredibly hard work. All three sides said that they were tough talks, but they ended with a closing statement that said, we still believe we can get this wrapped up quickly. That inspired a lot of confidence in the markets and in the media. But there's a number of us as analysts who are quite skeptical about that.
Well, that seems contradictory to what you just described. Is there any way to know if the U.S. side, if President Trump and his negotiators really believe some of the things they've said, like this is the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals, or if this is a negotiating posture?
It's very difficult to know exactly what they're thinking, of course, but I think the fact that the president has come back time and time again to the fact that, or to the statement that NAFTA is a disaster, that's the worst trade deal that we've ever signed, I think that suggests that he has really bought into this idea, that he believes it firmly. And that suggests that he's only going to be satisfied if there are significant changes to the treaty. Now, what those are, what would satisfy President Trump, we don't know. We've had all these news reports recently that, in fact, he wants to see tariffs being placed on goods. And certainly, part of this is about bringing back jobs into American manufacturing. So unless he can come out of this and say, look, we've actually done something to help the American worker, then he may not be satisfied. Is he serious about some of his threats to withdraw from the NAFTA? I think a lot of the evidence points to the fact that he is serious about that. Apparently, he came very, very close earlier on this year to just making the announcement. There's now a full-blown debate in the media about whether he has the legal capacity to single-handedly pull the United States out of NAFTA. The majority of experts think that he probably does, although there is a small group of analysts who say that no, he would need the Congress to go along with this. And certainly, a lot of the rumors that are circulating around Washington over the past 2 days and in Mexico City suggest that there is a growing fear that he's serious about pulling the United States out.
Duncan, do we know exactly what that would mean? So I think, for instance, of the transgender serving in the military ban, which now in the hands of the Pentagon is an analysis of transgender service in the military, not an immediate ban. If the president were to say we're withdrawing from NAFTA, what happens? Does everything change overnight, or would it trigger an ongoing process similar to, say, Brexit? I know I'm mixing my metaphors all over the table.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, the first thing is that the president would have to actually issue a formal written statement withdrawing the United States from NAFTA. And there would be a transition period in which the United States has to give a certain amount of time in order for that to happen. But he can do it. And would he get the collaboration of his administration? Absolutely. I mean, he has the right to do it. Would there be enormous opposition from business, from Congress, and even from some people within the administration, yes, we can expect that. They may even, before the document is signed, you will see a consolidated push to try to get him to change his mind, as we saw earlier on this year. But, you know, there's been a number of stories circulating over the past few days about the visit that is going on right now of the Foreign Secretary of Mexico, Luis Videgaray, and the Secretary of the Economy, Ildefonso Guajardo, who are here in Washington right now, and they're talking about bilateral trade issues with the United States because of this fear that there might be an announcement by the president in the next few days. And so we've gone to discussions of, well, you know, the first round of NAFTA negotiations were tough, but we're optimistic, to now saying, Mexico is saying, we've got a plan B in case everything falls apart. We'll go back to WTO tariffs and we'll begin to look for other suppliers and other markets.
Do you have clarity on what would be sort of the list of deal makers versus the list of deal breakers? Because when you say that some are saying this could be relatively quick, do they know something we don't know, or is there a clear path to an agreement?
So both sides have some truth in them. So there's a way to get this done quickly, whereby you use a lot of the language that was negotiated through the TPP, and you bring that in. So on intellectual property, for example, on questions of labor and environmental standards, you can bring that in, and that simplifies things. But you can't do that for everything. And I think there are certain issues which the United States has been insistent on up to this point, such as dispute resolution mechanisms within the NAFTA, that the United States wants to eliminate some or all of those. And Mexico and Canada are insistent that that is why they want to keep the NAFTA alive, is because those mechanisms help to facilitate a healthy trading and economic relationship between the three parts. The question of government procurement, for example, the United States would very much like to allow sub-federal entities spending federal money to be able to buy American, not to have to abide by WTO or NAFTA rules to allow Mexico and Canadian firms to provide those goods or services to that level of government. And Mexico and Canada is like, no, we want to have those in there. So there's a number of issues that are really red line issues for Mexico and Canada that the United States sees as negotiating priorities.
So connecting the dots, does the impact of the hurricane in Texas and now the tropical storm in Texas, Harvey, does this have any impact on these negotiations?
So as a lot of our viewers know, over the weekend, the president sort of sent a series of tweets, and two of which were, one, Mexico is going to end up paying for the wall. And the second one was, Mexico and Canada are being very difficult in NAFTA negotiations. I may have to pull us out, right? The Mexican government responded beautifully to this with a written statement from the Foreign Ministry, which laid out 4 points to counteract the president's tweets. And the first one of those was that we categorically will not pay for this wall. Number 2 was we're not going to negotiate NAFTA through social media. And it goes on. But the most beautiful thing about it was they ended it in the most elegant way possible. They said, and by the way, the Mexican government and people would like to offer their assistance for Hurricane Harvey, as all good friends and neighbors should do. And this offer, which had been widely reported in the American press, is that the Mexican government would like to send assistance northwards to the people of Texas. And Luis Videgaray, the foreign secretary, has also extended that offer directly to Governor Abbott in Texas. And what this does is it calls to mind not just the relationship between the two countries, but a beautiful incident which happened back in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina, when, with Vicente Fox as president in those times, the Mexican government decided that they would send aid northwards to the people affected by the hurricane. And the guy who was the number 2 at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City at the time received a call from the government. And this call said, we're sending you aid. And we're going to send it up to the United States. And he said, that's wonderful. Let me just clear this with Washington. They said, it's too late. We've already sent it. So you actually had ships that were sailing across the Gulf of Mexico and the Mexican army marching north with assistance towards the U.S. border. And the U.S. government wasn't really aware of it. Luckily, everything worked out. And it stands out as one of the best examples of an emerging economy helping a powerful nation, and one of the best examples of diplomacy and public relations that is used over and over again in bilateral affairs. So this offer of assistance today for Hurricane Harvey brings to mind all of that goodwill that was there back in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina.
Well, thank you. It is certainly complex, and I'm sure you'll be back as the story unfolds because it's just beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Duncan, thank you.
Cheers.